Today we are going to be talking about one of the most complex armies, at least historically speaking, in Warhammer 40,000. We're going to talk about army rules, data cards, stratagems and more. If you enjoyed the content, consider leaving a thumbs up and subscribing, as well as checking the links in the description below if you want to support what I do. My name is Patriarch and this is Senpai of Wargames. So the Genestealer cults have had a rough history when it comes to their rules, their playability and getting new players into their faction. While the models have attracted some players, especially the ones that like the Mad Max style, the rules have scared a lot of players away, and I'm speaking from personal experience here because I've had a lot of players introduced to the game and a lot of them chose Genestealer cults at first, and then after playing a couple of games they decided that it's not a faction for them, at least playability wise. They didn't just go off and sell all of their models, because that's just what crazy people do in my opinion. They just kept them and they've waited for a new edition, for a new codex, and the time is now. So let's talk about all the rules and see whether the Genestealer cult's army and faction is going to be a little bit more playable, especially for new players. First of all, we have the army rule. Previously we had all the kinds of different rules, crossfire, ambushing, the little blips that you could position on the battlefield, which kind of shrouded you and you could choose which unit was there after the fact, after turn 1 or after going for the first turn. And now we have cult ambush. It reads, if your army factions Genestealer cults, each time a unit with this ability is destroyed, roll 1d6, adding 3 to the result if it is a battle line unit. On a 4-up, that unit is placed into cult ambush and you can place one cult ambush marker anywhere on the battlefield that is more than 9 inches horizontally away from all enemy units. If this is not possible, no marker is placed. If an enemy model, excluding aircraft, ends any kind of move within 9 inches of a cult ambush marker you placed, that cult ambush marker is removed from the battlefield. At the end of the reinforcement step of your opponent's next movement phase, for each of your cult ambush markers that are still on the battlefield, you can select one unit from your army that is in a cult ambush and set it up that destroyed unit on the battlefield using the Deep Strike ability, containing all of its models with their full wounds remaining and with at least one of those models touching that cult ambush marker. Last but not least, characters that are attached to a unit with this ability are not returned alongside that unit should it return to the battlefield as described above. So what this is an extremely strong reanimation rule that a lot of people have kind of drawn lines to Necrons and so on, and they were very butthurt about that. I'm not going to go into the whole Necron debacle here, but this seems like an extremely strong rule with a lot of counterplay and a lot of interaction between you and your opponent, which I really personally like. You have a huge chance to bring battle line back, like technically for free. You can bring battle line back all the time because you're adding 3 to the dice roll, and 3 plus 1 happens to be 4 plus. And then you can bring any of your other more elite units that are not battle line back, but you need to have a little bit of a luck of a roll and roll a 4-up, which is very strong. And your opponent's counterplay is that you are placing those pips, and your opponent, for example, Grey Knights or Eldari, can just move over there, move within 9 inches of that marker and just destroy it. Now, a lot of people have been asking, how are you going to resurrect models against highly mobile armies like Grey Knights or Eldari? You just position them closer to your own guys, where it is almost impossible for your opponent to get to the blip or to the marker unless they are overextending and getting themselves in an extremely unfavorable position. What you're doing here is not only resurrecting stuff, you're also directing the movement of your opponent and you're kind of steering the battle the way you want it to happen. So some of these blips will be sacrifices you're going to place that are just there so you can get certain models out of your opponent's army out of position or force them to make difficult decisions. This army rule is still extremely complex and not beginner friendly at all. I'm just going to say that. It requires a lot of game sense, knowledge about the opposing army, their movement characteristics, and which markers and which units to sacrifice or which blips and which to make almost 100% certain that they come back. It requires a lot of game sense. So keeping that in mind, I still think this is one of the coolest army rules out there. Very interactive, allows counterplay, makes the entire game a lot of fun. Your opponent can always choose whether they want to destroy them and get out of position or whether they want to let you resurrect your battle line or at times other units. And yeah, Cult Ambush I'm personally a big fan of. And yeah, while this is not the most beginner friendly army rule at all, I think it's the least beginner friendly army rule out of all of them. I think it's definitely one of the strongest ones and one of the coolest ones because you have all the options available to you. You're either getting a unit back at full wounds with everything except for a character if one was previously attached, or you're bringing an opponent out of position entirely if you place them correctly. So I think it's a win-win for you either way. And yeah, it's a rule that probably requires you to play at least a dozen of games to get a good feel for it, how to position things where, but I think this one could be one of the strongest rules out there. So if you've watched any of my other army previews, you know that I really like if GW goes the extra mile and makes the faction previews a little bit more synergistic, so they show off that the army rule and the detachment rule as well as a couple of data cards really work together and make your army better than it would be in a vacuum. And that is exactly what we are getting from this detachment rule, which reads, they came from below. Each time a Genestealer Cults unit from your army is set up on the battlefield as reinforcements until the end of your next fight phase, weapons equipped by models in that unit have the Sustained Hits 1 ability and Ignores Cover ability. Sustained Hits 1 is exploding sixes, so every critical hit generates an additional hit, and Ignores Cover means no unit against you can get an additional pip of armor if they are in cover. Easy, you can put 500 points in reserves anyway, and your armor rule synergizes with that because they're all coming back in the reinforcement step and all make use of this specific rule. Really damn good. Last but not least, and this is also part of the army rule apparently, you can bring Brood Brothers. This means that you can bring up to 500 points of Brood Brothers in your 2000 points game, and that means you can bring some Leman Russes, Ordnance Field Batteries and all that good stuff, but you're heavily limited what you can bring from the Astra Militarum roster as indicated on the very bottom of this specific graphic, which means no epic heroes, Ogrins and so on. But the examples that GW gives with the Leman Russ, Field Ordnance Batteries and Death Strikes are good examples for models that might be missing in the regular Genestealer Cults roster, and it would help you out in a heavy weapon department. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that your Brood Brothers are not getting the Genestealer Cults faction keyword, so you're not going to benefit at all from your army rule, detachment rule, and so on with these guys. They are purely a supportive piece in your army, and they are just there if you really need some anti-tank firepower or some heavier weapons than you would usually find within your Genestealer Cults army roster. So view it as a purely supportive choice and don't just always consider bringing 500 points of them because it's not always going to be very useful. Next up, we are going to be talking about data cards, and the Neophyte Hybrids are first. They have a ton of weapons. I'm not sure if I'm going to go over literally every single one of them, but we are going to try and cover the most interesting parts. First up, their base stat line is exactly what we are expecting. Movement 6, tier 3, save of 5 up, 1 wound, a leadership of 7, which is arguably better than what they had before, and an OC of 2 because they are a battle line unit. So they are the prime target for your army rule. They are always going to come back at least as a pip at the beginning, and they have a real chance to be resurrected whenever they die. And when it comes to the base stat line, as I said, exactly what we expected, a little bit better of a leadership than initially thought, but everything else is the same. They have the deep strike ability, which is really damn good because it's better than just putting things into basic reinforcements. They make use of the army faction rules, and they have a rule called a plan generations in the making. At the start of your command phase, roll 1d6 for each objective marker you control that is one or more units from your army with this ability within range of it. If one or more of these results is a 4+, you gain 1 CP. This is very reminiscent of previous units we've seen. This is a CP generator, especially for armies that are going to need it. And Genestealer Cults have always been very prone to being very expensive when it comes to command points and spending them on stratagems because they heavily relied on them. I think this is going to get toned down a little bit considering we are getting way less command points, but abilities like these give hope that some of the stratagems are going to be very, very strong and useful, and that you are likely going to use them whenever you get the chance. So Neophyte Hybrids in that sense are going to be a key part of your army, simply so you get the chance to generate a lot of command points, which are going to be probably very valuable. Next up, we are looking at the war gear abilities, and here we have the cult icon. In the reinforcement step of your movement phase, you can return up to 3 destroyed models from the bearer's unit. And if the bearer's unit is within range of an objective marker, you can return D3 plus 3 destroyed models to that unit instead. this ability cannot be used to return destroy character models in attached units. That makes sense. It's a very strong regeneration ability, considering most of the time your Neophyte Hybrids are just going to get deleted wholesale and you're going to bring them back as a pip. But if that doesn't happen, you still have a good chance to bring back either 3 of them or on average 5, which is damn strong. And yeah, it kind of seems that the Genestealer cults have way better regeneration and resurrection abilities than the Necrons have. I will admit that. It's a little bit weird, but it makes sense considering that Neophyte Hybrids are really weak and they're probably going to be very, very cheap. So it's not that bad. I think bringing back 5 of them is not going to give you back that many points, but yeah, it's fine. The weapons are more or less exactly what we expect. The auto pistol is just a bad pistol at strength 3, AP 0, damage 1. The hybrid firearm at least has rapid fire 1, so you're getting a little bit of a longer range regularly, but if you're within half range, so pistol range, you're getting 2 shots. The leader pistol has strength 4, so that is better, I guess. The flamer is a basic flamer, ignores cover, and is a torrent weapon because it hits automatically at strength 4, AP 0, damage 1. Really not much more to comment on here. The grenade launcher has a frag and a crack mode. Blast is a good rule now in 10th edition, so you're going to get a lot of additional hits off of this one at strength 4, AP 0, damage 1. And for crack, you have strength 9, AP 2, damage 3. That was previously strength 6, AP 1, damage D3. And yeah, this one scaled exactly the way I expected it to, and you're going to do great with this one against rhinos, light vehicles, elite infantry, and yeah, something like Terminators maybe, if they're unlucky and, you know, fail their invulnerable save. That would be very useful against them, or you're going to have the chance to get in a little bit of damage to a rhino possibly. Very cool. Then we have the heavy stubber with rapid fire 3, so at 18 inches you are shooting 6 shots at ballistic skill 4, strength 4, AP 0, damage 1. Useful against swords, perfectly adequate against T3 infantry because you're going to win on 3 and force a lot of saves, and they are usually not having the best of saves, as you can see with the Neophyte Hybrids. And then we have the stronger weapons, the really hard-hitting ones, and the ones where Neophyte Hybrids are decent battle line infantry in my opinion, simply because they have those options available to them. We have a mining laser with heavy. This is 1 shot at strength 12, AP minus 3, damage D6 plus 1. This was previously strength 9, AP minus 3, damage D6. So the strength didn't scale equally. Strength 9 was previously you're wounding anything on a 3, most of the things on a 2. That is definitely not the case with strength 12. So that is a nerf. AP minus 3 was retained, and damage D6 plus 1 is a buff. So overall, I think the mining laser is still a very decent weapon with heavy, ballistic skill of 5 up, so you can make that a little bit better if you stay stationary. But all in all, keep in mind that if your units come back from deep strike or from the reinforcement step, you get sustained hits 1, and you have a very real chance, a 16.6% chance, that your mining laser is going to get an exploding hit. Just something to keep in mind. It's not going to happen all the time, but whenever it happens, it's going to feel great. And the same applies to the seismic cannon and the Weber. The seismic cannon is heavy with rapid fire 2, also hitting on 5, so you can offset that with the heavy rule. Strength 6, AP minus 1, damage D3. Previously, the seismic cannon had 2 different weapon profiles. They decided to consolidate them. Previously, the stronger one had strength 6, AP minus 2, damage 2. So they basically did exactly what I said. They consolidated both of the profiles, found a kind of middle ground at 24 inches of range, and it's a decent weapon against heavier infantry, especially looking at things like orcs, space marines, and so on. And then we have the Weber, which is just devastating wounds and torrent. It's a little flamer thing. Devastating wounds obviously means that this is there to deliver mortal wounds. It kind of feels like the Weber is a little bit of a psychic power, looking at the rules with devastating wounds and so on. But all in all, this one feels a little bit weird, considering that devastating wounds only triggers on a critical wound roll, and you're not going to rule a whole lot of them with 6 attacks. So yeah, just something to keep in mind. Last but not least, we have the melee weapons. We have a regular chainsword at 2 attack, strength 3, AP 0, damage 1. With weapon skill 4. The same basically applies here than what I said for the Drukhari Kabbalite warriors. The Cabalite Warriors hit a little bit better than Neophyte Hybrids, but I think this is a perfectly adequate stat line to get basic toughness 3 infantry downsized so you can overpower them with your personal OC score of your Neophyte Hybrids. I think it's perfectly adequate. Power weapon is basically strength 4, AP minus 2, damage 1. Very similar to what a power sword is these days, but obviously hitting worse. And then we have a regular close combat weapon, which is just 1 attack at strength 3, AP 0, damage 1, which then gets a lot worse because just 1 attack, you know. And then when it comes to the keywords, what makes the Neophyte Hybrids also great is that they have the grenade keyword, so they have an additional potential source to deal mortal wounds if you really need to, which is something I think that is overlooked quite a lot. I have not obviously tried the grenade keyword yet and how well it works in actual gameplay, but I think that having this available and having additional options to deal mortal wounds out of nowhere can be very important, especially when you're contesting objectives, which your Neophyte Hybrids are designed to do. So all in all, I think that the Neophyte Hybrids are going to be a mainstay of the army. You're going to bring quite a lot of them simply to ensure that you're going to get some of your CP back. And they are quite durable and kind of a little bit like bugs that just don't want to die. Because either you kill them wholesale, as I said, and they come back as blips. Or if you don't kill them outright, they come back with either 3 models or D3 plus 3 models. They are very reminiscent of bugs in that way. So really cool data card in my opinion. The weapons look very promising, especially the mining laser. And yeah, let's move over to the Patriarch. So the Patriarch is another very core model to the Genestealer cults. It's a very effective model, previously with a lot of psychic shenanigans, very strong in melee and so on. So how did it change? Everything is the same, movement 8, T5. It has lost a wound. The save is still at 4 up. Leadership at 6 is comparable to what it was previously, and an OC of 1. So in that sense, it is very similar, a little bit squishier because toughness scaled up quite a bit and it lost 1 wound, but I think it's still fine. When we look at the abilities, it has the Deep Strike rule. Obviously, I think most of the data cards for the Genestealer cults are going to have that one. Infiltrator, so that means that you can position it anywhere on the battlefield 9 inches away from your opponent in the deployment step. And it is a leader, which means you can attach it to any kind of unit. Now, we've seen the leak for the 9th edition rules. While the Patriarch has the Infiltrator's rule, I'm fairly certain that the Infiltrator rule only triggers if the unit it is attached to also has the Infiltrator's keyword. If it doesn't, you basically treat your unit as if it didn't have the Infiltrator's rule. Just something to keep in mind. Then it has a lot of abilities. It has Might from Beyond. While this model is leading a unit, melee weapons equipped by models in that unit have the Devastating Wounds ability, so critical wounds deal mortal wounds and the attack step ends. Cosmic Horror, Psychic. At the start of the fight phase, each enemy unit within 6 inches of this model must take a Battle Shock test. Really damn good. I'm not sure whether Genestealer cults are going to have a lot of interactions with Battle Shock and whether they are going to reward you for Battle Shocking opponents. But I'm 99% certain that they are going to have a detachment once their codex arrives that is going to reward you for exactly this kind of stuff. Then we have Psychic Familiar. Once per battle at the start of the fight phase, this model can use its Psychic Familiar. If it does, until the end of the phase, double the range of its Cosmic Horror ability. This is just really good. What it did previously was a little bit better, obviously, with all the Psychic shenanigans. But, you know, extending the range here can really decide whether you're getting something into range or whether you're not getting it into range. And yeah, forcing Battle Shock tests, especially on armies that have a slightly weaker Battle Shock or leadership at 7 or 8 plus, is going to be very valuable. And last but not least, we have a little designer's note. Place a Psychic Familiar token next to the model, removing it once the ability has been used. This should have been written down in the rules text, actually, and not as a designer's note, because a designer's note feels a little bit like explainer text, and in Magic the Gathering, for example, we don't consider this to be rules text per se. Kind of weird, but you know, it explains the rules or whatever. Then we have an invulnerable save of 4 up, which is fine. It needs that kind of durability. The regular save is not going to do a whole lot unless it is in cover. If you place the Patriarch in cover, you're probably going to have a lot of use cases for the regular save as well. Then when we look at the keywords, it has Infantry, Character, Psyker, Great Devourer, Epic Hero, and Patriarch. Makes sense. When we look at the attacks, it has sadly lost an attack, but the attacks for the Patriarch class got Devastating Wounds and they are twin linked, which was not the case previously. So in that sense, it won a lot. Devastating wounds, obviously critical wounds are mortal wounds, and twin link means you can reroll the wound roll. At 5 attacks, weapon skill 2, strength 6, AP minus 2, damage 2, you're going to rip apart anything that is elite infantry, and this is basically designed to take out basic space marines and any 2-wound infantry, and there's a lot of it running around these days. If you're going to deal mortal wounds with your attacks, those I'm fairly certain spill over. So if you deal 2 mortal wounds against, say, guardsmen, I think you actually kill 2 guardsmen with that attack. So this is a really cool rule to kill masses of infantry, and especially with twin linked, your probability to roll 6s in your wounding step is a lot higher. So there's a lot of synergy going on just within this one weapon, and it seems very promising, even though at first you might think, this looks a little bit weak, but if you think about it, it's really strong and it can be good against hordes and elite infantry. This is not going to do anything against vehicles or anything toughness 7 or above. It's going to struggle a lot. So all in all, I think even though the Patriarch has lost a lot of his mortal wounding abilities with the psychic powers and so on, I think the Patriarch claws make up a little bit for it. They didn't have the attacks for the Patriarch claws, even though it got twin linked, which is a win. The stats are more or less the same, and the abilities given to the Patriarch are useful. But it kind of feels like the Patriarch is not going to be a must-have in the army, which is a little bit weird to say, considering it was previously one of the best models in the book, and now it is kind of there. Getting the devastating wounds ability on your melee weapons is going to be nice. Cosmic Horror is a nice to have ability, but I've not seen a lot of synergistic stuff with Battle Shock, and everything else seems fine. It's not bad by any means, but it also doesn't scream must take. So yeah. Next up, we have the weapon spotlight for the Reductor Saboteur and their weapon. We have the demolition charges, which were previously one-shot weapons as well. You can just use them once. They were very strong for what the model was, and then the model kind of lost a lot of its value. But the weapons here went up, in my opinion, in their usability. The strength obviously didn't quite scale. You're not going to wound absolutely anything on 4s or 3s anymore, but most of the relevant stuff. So if we look at the demolition charges, it says assault, so you can use it while advancing without any penalties. Blast means you're going to get a ton of use against huge squads of orc boys or ideally space marines. And one shot means you use it once and then it ceases to exist. And we are talking about range 6, d6 plus 3 attacks plus blast. It's going to be usually more than that. Ballistic skill 2, so you're going to hit most of the time, and if not, a command reroll is advisable here. At strength 12, AP minus 2, damage 2. Ideal for a 10-man squad of intercessors. Just throw it in there at d6 plus 5 attacks and probably kill most of them. Really good in that sense. It is also useful against vehicles because you're still making d6 plus 3 attacks, which on average is 6.6 attacks, so between 6 and 7. And you're going to deal a significant amount of damage to it, considering you have AP minus 2 and most vehicles don't have any invulnerable save. Really damn good in my opinion. But you need to be very close, and the Reductor Saboteur is obviously not very tanky. Then we have Remote Explosives, which is a blast and indirect fire weapon at range 24, the same attack stat, a lesser ballistic skill, and just strength 5, AP 0, damage 1. So this is just an explosive that you can throw in a wider range, especially good against basic infantry, but at AP 0 it is going to struggle a lot. So I would always try to get my Reductor Saboteur as close as possible, but if that is not possible at all, and if you don't see an opening, just using the remote explosives is going to be a good thing to have, simply so your Reductor Saboteur doesn't go unused. Really damn good. All in all, it lost a lot of AP here. Previously, the remote explosives had AP minus 3, damage 8, which is definitely not the case anymore. It is way weaker than it was previously, but it is what it is. It has a different use case, and the demolition charges is, strength 8, AP minus 3, damage 2, which was previously. Now it's strength 12, AP minus 2, damage 2, which I still think is fine. Absolutely fine. Considering blast got better, assault is great, and so on. So I think the weapons here look very promising. Next up, we are talking about another weapon spotlight for the Abominants. We have the Power Sledgehammer here. This one was previously a strength 10 weapon, which was incredible for 9th edition. AP minus 3, damage D3 plus 3. So as you can see, we are still at 3 attacks, weapon skill 3, which is great for such a weapon, at strength 12, which didn't scale appropriately, AP -2, so we lost 1 pip of AP, and damage d6 +1. So what we've lost here is a pip of AP, we've lost strength because it didn't scale equally, and we lost reliability in the damage. I'm not 100% sure why GW decided to do that, considering Abominants weren't the strongest thing in the Genestealer Cult's codex, but here we are. I hope that the data card is going to show off a lot of cool rules, a lot of additional stuff that is going to make them better and make them more useful. But as it stands, the Power Sledgehammer is probably not the best weapon to show off. I get that we're in an edition that is promoting kind of less killiness, but some weapons, especially those meant against vehicles, should still be good against vehicles, and while this is still very useful against them, it is certainly weaker, a lot weaker than it was before, at least in my opinion. And last but not least, we have 2 stratagems. This one is Coordinated Trap and costs 2 CP. I have to reiterate all the time that 2 CP is very expensive in 10th edition. Very, very expensive. So it reads, when at the start of your shooting phase or at the start of your fight phase, and you pick 2 Genestealer Cult units from your army that have not been selected to shoot or fight this phase, and 1 enemy unit. Until the end of the phase, each time a model in either of your unit makes an attack, it can only target that enemy unit, and only if it's an eligible target for that attack. When resolving that attack, add 1 to the wound roll. This is very much reminiscent of Crossfire without all the different other hoops you need to jump through. It is very strong, adding 1 to the wound roll, but you have some restrictions there with both units having to attack the same thing. It is only for 1 phase. And it is quite expensive at 2 CP. But you have a very similar thing than what you had previously, and I think this is going to find some use cases. I think because of the 2 CP, it's going to be very niche. For 1 CP, it would have been too strong. So here, this is one of the stratagems that I'm probably going to talk about quite a lot in the future when it comes to granularity of command points and it not existing. Because for 1 CP, this is clearly too good. For 2 CP, this is a little bit too expensive to be used more than once a game maybe. So yeah, it's a good stratagem. It is going to get used, but it is definitely just a once per game kind of thing, if at all. And the last stratagem we are going to take a look at is Tunnel Crawlers for 1 CP. You use it in your movement phase, and you target 1 Genestealer Cult's unit from your army that is arriving using the Deep Strike ability this phase, so most of the time. The effect is your unit can be set up anywhere on the battlefield that is more than 3 inches horizontally away from all enemy models. A unit that is targeted by the stratagem is not eligible to declare a charge in the same turn. Very similar to the upgrade you could have bought, which had a similar name to this one, and where you could just position yourself, I think it was 6 inches though, or maybe 3, away from the enemy, shoot a lot, and then probably die. So it is very reminiscent of that. I think for 1 CP it is absolutely fine, and you're going to be using this one quite a lot more than I think the stratagem that we've seen above. Tunnel Crawlers is going to see a lot of use, because 3 inches away means you can use a lot of grenades, a lot of super close combat weapons that the Genestealer Cults have access to. Quite a few of their stronger weapons just have a range of 6. So keeping that in mind, I think Tunnel Crawlers is going to be good, but we are going to have to see more data cards to properly evaluate this stratagem. So all in all, the Genestealer Cults look very solid to me, especially the army ability. As I said, with the one downside that it is not beginner friendly at all and requires a lot of knowledge about your own army and the opposing army. It is going to be one of the coolest army abilities out there. Very creative, very useful, very Genestealery. The rest looks very promising as well. The data cards. The Patriarch is one that I'm not so sure on, but the weapons and the stratagems also have a place, and it's going to probably be really decent. Next up, we are going to be talking about the Imperial Agents, so Assassins, probably a lot of the stuff that has been introduced with Kill Team. So if you're interested in that, consider subscribing and checking the video up once it goes up tomorrow. And other than that, if you have any opinion on Genestealer Cults, if you have been playing them a lot in 9th edition especially, please drop your opinion down in the comments below. I would be very curious to read what you think about the data cards, about the new rules. And if you are similarly excited than I am for what Genestealer Cults looks like to be in 10th edition. Other than that, I hope this video was insightful and I hope to see you in the next one. Thank you so much for watching. Take care.